All right, hello and welcome to this training. As you can see from the title, what we're going to be covering today is the crossover effect and delayed returns. And as you can see from the overview, what we're going to be talking about more specifically is first the overview itself, the truth about time, the trap of short-term thinking, the law of compounding choices, second-order consequences, the hidden mechanics of memory, the review, and your action items for the day or the next few days. Now, before we get started, if you want to work with me one-on-one, make sure to book a call from the link in the description. What will help you do is gain clarity on exactly what to do in every area of your life, meaning health, wealth, love, and self. And if you take care of those, we believe that happiness takes care of itself. So again, if you're interested in something like that, make sure to book a call from the link in the description. And with that said, let's actually get started and talk about the truth about time. So everything in your life runs on cause and effect. A cause is anything you do, an action, a choice, a repeated behavior. An effect is the result it produces, the state of your body, your bank account, your skill, your relationships, your mind. Every effect has a cause. In the old Hermetic text, the Kybalion put it as a law when it said every cause has its effect, every effect has its cause, everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. So this is as much of a physics concept as it is a spiritual one. And once that really lands, a lot of what looks like randomness in your life starts to dissolve. Nothing in your life simply happens on its own. What you're experiencing right now is not random. It's not luck, and it isn't something being done to you. It's output, and output can always be traced back to input. Now, that tracing only runs one way, though, from effect back to cause. And what makes it so hard is the time that sits in the gap between the two. In Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche named this exact trap when he wrote, "There is no more dangerous error than that of mistaking the effect for the cause." He was pointing at one of the mind's oldest mistakes. We notice what shows up last and we call it first, mostly because results are more visible and recent while the cause that produced it happened quietly, often months or years back, and then it faded out of view long before the effect ever arrived. You treat today's symptom like today's source, and you keep wondering why nothing changes at the root, when the root was planted in a season you've already half forgotten. Now, the only place you have leverage is at the level of the cause. You can't reach out and grab an effect directly. You can't will yourself leaner, richer, calmer, or sharper. You can only choose the causes, the inputs, and let them produce their effects. Marcus Aurelius pointed at this same spot in Meditations when he wrote, "Our life is what our thoughts make it," placing the cause right where you actually have a say in it. Now, most people spend their lives trying to fix effects while leaving the causes untouched, and that's why nothing changes for them. And every effect becomes a cause of its own. The result of today's choice becomes the starting condition for tomorrow's. So causes and effects link into long chains, each one setting up the next. A single decision is never really single. It's the first push in a sequence that keeps running long after you've forgotten you started it. It's the butterfly effect. It's the big domino. The cause and effect are almost never sitting next to each other in time. We're wired to expect that they are. Do the thing, get the result right away. So we judge our lives by what's happening now and assume it's the product of what we did recently. It almost never is. What you're living through today was set in motion by causes you started running months or even years ago, and the causes you're setting in motion today won't surface as effects until far down the line. So short-term thinking is a trap because it can't tolerate that delay. Small choices compound into something enormous because the delay gives the chain of cause and effect time to multiply. Second-order consequences matter because the real effects of a decision arrive way later than the first obvious one. And your own memory works against you because by the time an effect lands, you've forgotten the cause that created it. So most people evaluate their life by looking at what they're doing right now and comparing it to what they're getting right now. And that feels logical. It's also almost always wrong because the way time and effort and results actually work together looks nothing like that. And there's a graph that shows you what's really happening. And once you see it clearly, a lot of things about your life will start making sense. So the simple graph below shows a horizontal axis representing time moving to the right. Two lines start at the same point on the left side, and from there they move in completely opposite directions, as you can see. Now the first line tracks how well you remember the actions you took. Right after you do something, your memory of it is high. The workout from yesterday, the hard conversation you had last week, the decision you made on Monday morning. All of it is still vivid. All of it is emotionally present and easy to recall because it just happened. But that line slopes downwards over time pretty steeply because our memory of the boring, mundane, everyday things we do is pretty weak, understandably so, unless something really emotional happened. So within a few weeks, most of what you actually did has already faded from conscious recall. And it isn't the big moments that disappear first, obviously. It's the small, ordinary ones. The Tuesday morning you followed your habit when you really didn't feel like it, for example. Or the low-stakes evening you chose the harder thing instead of the easier one. Or the session that felt completely unremarkable at the time in the gym. Those small forgettable decisions are almost always the exact ones doing the real work underneath the surface of your life by the sheer fact that there's more of them. So they're compounding in the background, and your brain systematically discards them more and before they ever get to feel significant. Now, the second line tracks something completely different. It tracks the actual results you get from your effort. The real-world return that shows up in your body, your skills, your finances, your relationships, your mindset. And this line moves in the opposite direction from the first one. So early on, the return is near zero. Not because nothing is happening, but because nothing has had enough time to compound into something visible yet. And there's almost always a significant gap between when you put in the effort and when the effort surfaces as a result that you can actually see or feel or point to. And that gap is the most disorienting part of building anything real in your life, whether it's a physique or a business or a skill or a mental, emotional way of being. The effort comes first, the return comes later. And there's nothing in between except the quiet, invisible phase where most people give up. Now, eventually the two lines cross. Memory of the effort has dropped, and the return from that effort has risen. You're living inside results generated by work you've mostly forgotten, which you've probably done months ago or years ago. Which is exactly why progress often feels like it appeared from nowhere, like something finally just clicked when in reality it was being built by the entire time, below the surface, day by day, by your actions. The cause and effect relationship between your actions and your results isn't a straight line moving in real time. It's a delayed loop, and that delay is the single most important thing to understand about how growth actually works. So think about anything meaningful you've ever built or changed in your life. None of it showed up the day you decided to start. There was always a lag, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years, between when you put the effort in and when you could actually see it reflected in your reality. A body doesn't change the week you start training. A skill doesn't click the first month you practice it. A mindset doesn't shift the first time you try thinking differently. During that lag, the process is still running. The growth is genuinely happening, just not in any way you can see or feel or measure in the short term, which is what makes this invisible stretch so disorienting for most people who haven't been shown this graph and don't understand what silence actually means and don't understand the nature of cause and effect. Now, most people interpret that invisible stretch as proof that nothing is working, and so they stop right at the moment when the effort is closest to delivering, walking away from something that was about to change their trajectory entirely with no way to know how close they actually were. And every decision you make today is a cause without a visible effect yet. It's sending a signal into your future that will come back as a result, but it won't bounce back until long after you've moved on and mostly forgotten you sent it. So the ease you feel in your life right now, that you might be feeling in your life right now, was bought by effort you barely remember making. Same goes for the opposite. The hardship you're experiencing right now was most likely caused by something you did a long time ago. And the friction you're dealing with right now was accumulated by small decisions that felt low stakes and harmless at the time. What you're doing today is writing the script for what you'll be living inside in 3 to 5 years on the ordinary days when nothing feels particularly important, or at the very least, months ago. So, that distance between cause and effect is what makes small daily actions feel almost impossible to take seriously. They seem disconnected from any real consequence because the consequence hasn't arrived yet. But believe me, it's coming. It just always takes time, for good or for bad. There's a specific kind of confusion this creates that most people spend years inside without ever understanding what's causing it. You look at your life right now and try to figure out what you did recently that caused what you're experiencing, and you're almost always looking in the wrong window. Your current results aren't a reflection of last week or last month. They're a reflection of what you were doing 2, 3, 5 years ago on the most ordinary days when nothing felt urgent. The best results in your life right now were earned by choices you barely remember making. The compounding was happening and consistently in the background, and by the time it surfaced as something you could point to, the inputs had long since faded from memory. And the same is true for what's not working. The difficulty you're living in right now was almost always seeded years ago on days that felt inconsequential and easy to let slide. Days where the cost of the small, bad decision felt invisible in the moment. And when people can't trace their current reality back to its actual causes, they blame whatever's nearby: the circumstances, the timing, other people. And James Allen cut straight through that habit in As a Man Thinketh when he wrote, "Circumstances do not make the man, it reveals him to himself." Which is the exact reversal almost nobody realizes. All of it feels genuinely true from the inside, which is the most disorienting part of not understanding this graph. The cause is almost never where you're looking for it. It's buried much further back in the pattern of small invisible choices that compounded over time into the reality you're currently standing inside. And once you really absorb that, you will change how you relate to the present moment. You'll stop trying to diagnose your life by examining recent history, and you start paying much more careful attention to what you're planting right now for the future, fully understanding that today's inputs are tomorrow's outputs. And the graph eventually flips for everyone, and the direction it flips depends entirely on what you fed it. For people who kept building their life, the crossover point is where everything seems to change at once. Results compound into more results, effort that felt invisible starts showing up everywhere, and the work you barely remember turns out to have been the foundation of a life that now feels almost effortless. And people on the outside will say it happened fast, that you changed overnight, that your success came out of nowhere. Because what they can see is only the emergence, not the long invisible phase that preceded it. But you'll know, if you've been paying attention, that it was built. One ordinary day at a time, one boring day at a time, with no applause and no confirmation in the quiet stretch before the lines crossed. Now, for people who were stopped building because they didn't realize the cause-effect relationship of their actions, the crossover goes the other way. The weight of forgotten small choices arrives all at once, and it's enormous and hard to trace, which is exactly what makes it feel like something happened to them rather than something they built. And that's not a comfortable thing to say, but it's the most useful thing I can offer you in this training. The life you're headed towards is being constructed right now by you through decisions that feel too small to matter. The urgency isn't about panic or pressure, it's the quiet, focused urgency of someone who understands that today counts, that this ordinary moment is part of the graph, and that the line is always moving in one direction or the other based entirely on what you're feeding it. So, with that covered, let's actually talk about the trap of short-term thinking. So if the graph is this clear, and if patience and long-term consistency are obviously what the math rewards, then why doesn't everyone just do that? And the answer is more biological than it is about character. We've been literally wired to think short, and the world we're living in has done everything it can to make that wiring stronger. Understanding this isn't just interesting, it's necessary because you can't escape a trap you haven't identified. Your brain has a deep built-in preference for immediate returns over delayed ones. And this isn't a weakness or a personal failing you should feel bad about. It's an old feature of the system, one that made sense in a completely different environment, and it is actively working against the kind of life you're trying to build, which all requires long-term thinking. So the dopamine system works the same way here. It's drawn to fast feedback. It gets activated by clear, immediate, tangible results, and it genuinely struggles to assign real emotional weight to something that's going to pay off in 2 years. So researchers call this temporal discounting, the brain's tendency to place less value on future rewards the further out they are. A win you can feel this week registers as more real than a win you'll have in 5 years, even when the 5-year win could be 50 times larger. The math doesn't matter to the emotional system, proximity does. So the modern world has made this considerably worse by flooding your environment with fast, reliable dopamine hits so that your brain's baseline expectation for how quickly satisfaction should arrive has completely collapsed. Every notification, every refresh, every instant delivery recalibrates your sense of a normal reward timeline downwards until anything that takes more than a few weeks starts to feel like it isn't working. And the result is a nervous system that has been trained to expect results faster than reality actually delivers them, and then to interpret the absence of fast results as evidence that something is wrong. You eat clean for 3 days and the scale doesn't move, so you decide it isn't working. You meditate for a week and still feel anxious, so you drop it. You work on your craft for a month and the numbers don't move, so you convince yourself the approach is bad. None of those conclusions have anything to do with whether the direction was right. They're just evidence that your calibrated timeline is shorter than the actual payoff timeline. And the action was fine, the direction was fine. The mismatch was between when your brain expected the reward and when the reward actually arrives. And until you deliberately recalibrate that gap, you'll keep abandoning things that were working. So short-term thinking creates a specific and very durable cycle, one that's self-reinforcing and genuinely hard to see clearly from the inside. And it goes like this. You start something with genuine effort and good intentions. You don't see fast results. Your brain interprets that as a failure. You quit and move to the next thing. You start with that same energy, the same timeline expectation, and the same calibration. You get the same outcome, the same exit. And over years, you end up with a scattered trail of half-built things and a growing belief that you're just someone who doesn't follow through. And that belief becomes its own problem, separate from the original one. Now you're not just dealing with impatience, you're dealing with a self-concept that says, I don't stick with things, and that identity will keep pulling you off course even after you've intellectually understood the patience side of the equation. But the identity is the product of the loop, not the cause of it. Most people who struggle with follow-through aren't fundamentally inconsistent people. They've been consistent in other things, right? So they've been operating inside a calibration mismatch for so long that they've started to misread their own character. And the loop is especially hard to break because each individual exit feels completely reasonable. There's always a good enough reason to stop. The strategy might have felt off, the timing wasn't right, the results weren't there. None of those reasons are entirely false. They just aren't the full story. Stephen Pressfield named the real force sitting underneath them in The War of Art. He said, resistance is experienced as fear. The degree of fear equates to the strength of resistance. And that fear is what sounds as a sensible reason to walk away. Now, short-term thinking is extraordinarily good at disguising itself as rational decision-making. It doesn't feel like impatience. It feels like intelligent course correction, like you're being smart and adaptive rather than reactive and impatient. The honest test is simple. Are you leaving because the direction was genuinely wrong, or are you leaving because the results weren't fast enough for your preference? Those are completely different situations requiring completely different responses, and most people never stop to distinguish them. Now, beyond the quitting cycle, short-term thinking also distorts where you put your daily attention. And that's arguably the most costly problem of the two. Because when you're calibrated for short timelines, you naturally zoom in on the micro level. You obsess over individual workouts. You obsess over individual sessions, over individual focus blocks, over individual posts, over individual days, constantly checking for evidence that what you're doing is paying off right now and something you can point to. But individual data points on a long-term trend are almost meaningless. Individual data points on a long-term trend are almost meaningless. Any single day tells you almost nothing about whether you're on the right track. You need dozens, hundreds of data points before any real signal emerges from the noise, and by the time you have enough to make a real assessment, you've usually already quit. So when you're that zoomed in, you end up reacting to things that don't actually matter. You adjust and tweak and pivot based on information that's too granular to be useful. And you burn energy and create instability in processes that just needed some more time. And there's also a framing problem worth naming. Short-term thinking makes every slow day feel like a wasted day. Every quiet stretch feels like stagnation. Every period without visible progress feels like something has gone wrong. Slow days aren't wasted days. The quiet stretches are often when the deepest compounding is really happening, when habits are becoming automatic, when skills are being absorbed below conscious awareness, when the foundation is settling into something solid enough to actually build on. None of that looks dramatic from the outside, right? None of that looks big. But it's those ordinary, boring days that make the majority of our days when we're working towards something. So if we're trying to escape the ordinary ones, if we're trying to escape the regular day, the ordinary day that is going to be there regardless of what we're working towards, then we might as well just give up on actually going for that thing, because the majority of our days will be like that. Someone building for the long term understands this. A day where nothing visible happened is still a day where something invisible continued. That consistency is the entire mechanism. That's what grows the green line day after day, regardless of whether anyone's watching. So getting out of the short-term trap requires more than willpower. It requires a genuine shift in what you treat as a meaningful signal of progress on any given day. Right now, your brain treats fast, visible results as proof that something is working and their absence as proof that it isn't. That calibration needs to change. The new signal should be whether you ran your process today, whether you kept your commitment to the direction, not whether the results showed up yet. Viktor Frankl called this same turn in Man's Search for Meaning when he wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And the situation you can't change here is how long the returns actually take to arrive." So did you do the thing? Did you run the system? Did you make the decision your future self will thank you for? That's the only feedback that has any real predictive value on a daily basis, and the sooner that feels genuinely satisfying rather than like a consolation prize, the more durable your consistency becomes. And this is the deliberate kind of dopamine rewiring. You're redirecting what counts as feedback. You're training your brain to find its satisfaction in the process and the long-term results rather than in the outcome, which means choosing to reward the one thing you can fully control instead of chasing the one thing you can't. So the other practical shift here is deliberately expanding how far out you evaluate progress. So if right now you're evaluating on a weekly basis, try to do monthly basis. Try quarterly instead of monthly. When you zoom out that far, you stop reacting to the noise and start seeing the actual trend. If you're already doing quarterly, try to evaluate progress based on a year. If you're already doing it a year, then try to do it on 3 years or 5 years. Look back 12 months from right now and honestly assess how different you are. In most cases, if you've been doing any version of the right things with any version of consistency, the change is larger than you expected precisely because it happened so gradually, you never had a single moment where you could feel it accumulating. That evidence, when you actually look for it honestly, is really what builds genuine long-term trust in your own process. And you'll stop hoping it works and start watching it work in retrospect. That's a completely different and much more stable relationship with your own effort. And again, to quote Steve Jobs here, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. So you need to trust that somewhere in the future, the dots will connect, while you keep doing the actions that are required of you today. So with that said, let's cover the law of compounding choices. So the thing nobody tells you about long-term consistency is that the payoff isn't linear. It doesn't grow at a steady, predictable rate that you can track month to month with any real confidence. It grows the way compound interest grows, invisibly and slowly for a long time, and then suddenly and dramatically all at once. Understanding this will change how you relate to every single small decision on every single ordinary day. Compounding works by reinvesting its own returns, right? So each cycle builds on the one before it, which means the growth gets faster over time rather than staying flat. So when you make a good decision today, you don't just get the benefit of that one decision in isolation. You slightly improve the version of yourself who makes tomorrow's decision. And that slightly improved version makes a slightly better decision tomorrow. If you run that pattern out over months and years, and you produce results that look wildly disproportionate to the individual inputs that built them. So the problem is that in the early stages, when the compounding is just getting started, the growth is so small it's genuinely invisible. You're making marginally better decisions and getting marginally better results, and marginally better is nothing you can see or feel or point to on any given day, so it doesn't feel like it's working, and that feeling is completely understandable and completely misleading at the same time. So run 1% daily improvement out over a full year and you end up roughly 37 times better than when you actually started. That's how exponential growth works, and that's why the early phase feels so dishearteningly flat while the later phase feels almost effortless by comparison. And compounding is completely neutral about what it compounds. It doesn't care whether you're building something good or something destructive. Something destructive can also compound. It multiplies whatever you feed it with the same mathematical certainty and the same indifference. So one skipped workout doesn't maybe feel like much, but 20 skipped workouts spread across a month compound into a softer body, a weaker habit pattern, a slightly diminished belief in your own follow-through, and a slightly harder time getting started next time. Each of those effects then feeds into the next cycle. So the question isn't whether your choices are compounding, because they always are. The only question is which direction they're compounding in, and the honest answer to that on any given day is either you're building or you're eroding. There is no neutral. There's no day that just passes without leaving a mark somewhere on the graph. So good decisions rarely stay contained to the domain where you made them. They spread across your life in ways you didn't plan for, and you can't always trace back. So when you commit to a daily process and actually keep that commitment, you don't just get the direct benefit of that process, you build a stronger nervous system for keeping commitments in general. The discipline you develop in one domain starts showing up in your work, your eating, your sleep, your relationships, your ability to handle pressure. Each upgraded behavior strengthens your capacity for the other upgraded behaviors. Going to bed on time makes the early morning easier. The early morning makes the workout easier. The workout makes the afternoon more focused. The focused afternoon makes the evening calmer. Everything is one chain, and the chain runs in both directions. This is the hidden leverage of process-level investment. You think you're building one thing, but the compounding is happening across your entire life simultaneously in ways that are too slow to detect day to day and too significant to miss year to year. And how you do one thing is how you do everything because of that. The same ripple works in destructive directions too. One area where you're consistently making poor decisions will pull down adjacent areas you weren't even monitoring. A poor sleep routine leaks into your discipline. Poor discipline leaks into your nutrition. Poor nutrition leaks into your mood and focus. A degraded mood and focus leaks into your relationships and your output in your business or work. It all connects, and the leak that started in one place eventually shows up everywhere. And by the time the damage is obvious, you've usually forgotten where the chain even started, which makes it almost impossible to fix correctly. You're treating symptoms at the far end of the chain whose origin is buried months behind you. There's a specific point in the compounding curve where everything seems to change at once, and understanding how that works is what keeps you from quitting right before it happens. For a long time, growth is happening but entirely below the surface, invisibly, in ways your instruments can't detect. Your skills are sharpening, your habits are becoming more automatic, your knowledge is getting more integrated, you're acquiring more knowledge. At the same time, none of it shows up yet in any external metric you'd point to as proof. And this is the phase where doubt is loudest. This is also where the impatient part of you will be the loudest, whispering that it's time to pivot or try something new. And the disciplined part of you keeps building anyway, understanding that invisible growth is still growth and that the threshold is getting closer with every day you stay consistent. Every day you keep going during this phase, you're shortening the distance to the breakthrough. But there's no way to tell from the inside how close you actually are, which is part of what makes this phase genuinely difficult to navigate without a clear framework underneath you. So then, at some point, that feels sudden, even though it absolutely isn't, the growth breaks the surface. Results start showing up faster than you can account for, and things that were hard become easy. Opportunities appear that weren't there before. And this is what looks like overnight success from the outside, and it genuinely appears that way because the long invisible phase happened somewhere nobody was watching. Even you. What the world sees is the emergence, not the thousands of ordinary days that built it. And what separates people who sustain that emergence from those who squander it is whether they understand what actually caused it. If you think it was timing or luck, you won't know how to maintain it. If you understand it was compounding, you know exactly what to do. Keep doing what you were already doing. And this all points to the same practical conclusion. The most important question in your life right now isn't strategic, it's daily. Are you making the decision today that your future self will be grateful for? Not the plan, not the vision, the actual decision in this actual moment, on this actual ordinary day when nothing feels urgent and the results are nowhere in sight yet. That question, if you answer it correctly on enough ordinary days, is the entire game. The breakthroughs and emergences that look dramatic from the outside are built from the accumulated residue of correctly unanswered on ordinary days. Nothing more and nothing less. And that's honestly what makes this hard to hold on to. There's nothing exciting about it. There's no single insight that changes everything. There's just the daily choice made over and over until the graph does what graphs do when you keep feeding them the right inputs. So the practical standard for a good day then isn't did something good happen to me today? It's did I run my process today? That's the only metric that's actually within your control and the only one with any real predictive power over a meaningful time frame. Everything else, the results, the feedback, the visible signs of progress, those are outputs. They're lagging indicators that you influence but don't control. Your process is the one input you fully own, and the more you make it the center of your daily evaluation, the more stable and compounding your trajectory becomes. Over time, consistently running your process and watching the results eventually arrive builds a kind of trust in the system that becomes its own resource. You'll stop needing external validation to stay motivated. You'll stop needing the results to confirm the effort. You just know the math is running, and that knowing is something impatience will never have access to. So with that said, let's actually cover second order consequences because it relates to this. So one of the subtler reasons people stay stuck in short-term thinking, even after they intellectually understand the compounding framework, is that they keep evaluating their decisions based on the first thing that happens after them. The immediate consequence, the obvious one, the one your brain was built to track by default. You do something, you get something immediately. But most of the real consequences of any decision aren't the first ones. Whether those consequences are good or bad, by the way, doesn't really matter. They're the second ones, the ones that show up later, and the third order ones, and the fourth order ones, in places you weren't actually even watching, in ways you didn't even anticipate. Every decision you make has at least 2 layers of consequences, typically more. Even though the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and so on order consequences get increasingly more difficult to actually see and track. Now, the first layer is immediate, visible, and easy to track. The second layer is delayed, indirect, and almost always more significant than the first. You eat the cake, and the first order consequence is that it tastes good and you feel temporarily satisfied. The second order consequence, compounded over months and years of that same pattern, is a body and a set of habits that don't match the life you're trying to build. So your brain tracks the first layer automatically and without effort. It's immediate, clear, and emotionally present. The second layer requires active effort to hold in view, which is why most people never develop the habit of looking for it at all. When you only track the first layer, you keep making decisions that feel fine in the moment while building a reality that will feel neither fine nor good when it actually arrives. So the same principle works for good decisions, and this is where it gets practically useful. The first order consequences of a good decision is often uncomfortable, boring, unrewarding. Sometimes it feels hard to do. You meditate and nothing dramatic happens in this moment. You journal and it just feels like writing things you already knew. You go to bed on time and miss whatever you would have done with the late hours. Those are the real first order costs of good decisions. And they feel like almost nothing in return for real effort. But the second order consequences compound and they always show up eventually. Clarity, focus, emotional regulation, the quiet confidence that comes from keeping your own promises, whatever it is, that edge other people can't really quite explain, none of it shows up immediately and all of it is real. So you can see on the image that you take an action and you get first order consequences. They're obvious, immediate, short-lived. And then the second order ones, they are delayed, hidden, but they are compounding. Whether they're good or bad, doesn't really matter. One of the most common and costly mistakes that people make is abandoning a direction at exactly the wrong moment. And second order blindness is almost always what's driving it. When someone quits a strategy or a routine or a process, they're usually misdiagnosing the situation. They're treating the absence of first order returns as evidence that the direction is wrong, when in reality they just haven't waited long enough for the second order returns to mature. Now the results aren't missing. They're just in the loading phase. You know, when you turn on a game, when it says loading, you don't just quit the game, right? You just wait. The compounding of the effort is still accumulating below the visible surface, and the moment you quit is often the moment you are closest to the breakthrough, with no way to know that from where you were standing. This is worth watching carefully in yourself as well. If you find yourself about to change course, ask whether the evidence is actually telling you the direction is wrong, or whether it's just telling you the timeline is longer than you expected. Those are completely different situations requiring completely different responses. And a lot of the times, the results we want typically appear after a way longer time frame than what we expected at first. Because in the beginning, we're not competent enough to be able to estimate an accurate timeline. And what turns out, as we start doing the thing and as we become more competent in the thing we do and we learn more about it, we start to find that it will take us longer than we expected. And then some people are fine with that and others quit and look for the next thing. And then they start the next thing and the same pattern reappears over and over and over again. Every decision you make is sending a consequence into your future, and it will come back regardless of whether you're thinking about it or not. Some consequences come back in days, some in months, some take years to fully land. The return always happens on its own schedule, with no regard for whether you remember the original decision or feel ready for what it's bringing back to you. Second order thinking is the practice of deliberately thinking further ahead than your brain naturally wants to, and asking not just what happens next, but and then what, and then what, and what after that, until you've traced the real consequence of the decision you're considering rather than just the first visible one. Now, there are no neutral decisions. Every choice is either sending a positive or a negative consequence into your future, even the ones that feel like nothing at all. The decision to scroll for another hour instead of sleeping feels completely neutral in the moment. Nothing bad happened visibly, right? Nothing changed. But the second order consequence is a slightly more wired nervous system, a slightly worse tomorrow, a slightly weaker habit of protecting your recovery, all of which compound over time into something that is definitely not neutral. And it's always the nothing decisions, the ones too small to feel significant, that accumulate into the biggest outcomes. The grand, dramatic choices in your life are the ones you remember and evaluate carefully. The small, invisible ones are the ones that actually run your trajectory. So one of the most powerful changes you can make is to start paying more careful attention to the decisions that feel like they don't matter. Understanding that those are often the ones compounding the hardest in whichever direction they're pointing. Every decision is the beginning of a chain. The length and direction of that chain is really determined entirely by the quality and consistency of the link you're adding right now on this ordinary day, when nothing feels particularly important. So you don't get to choose where the chain ends up from here, but you always get to choose the next link. And that link, added to the ones before it and all the ones that will follow it, is how the whole thing gets built or dismantled, one quiet choice at a time. Which means you're more responsible for where you end up than it's probably comfortable to fully accept. And you're also more capable of changing direction than you probably feel in the moments when you're most stuck. The chain is always being built. The only question is who's deciding what goes into it. Now, once you understand second order consequences, you can start using them deliberately. And that's where the real leverage in this whole framework lives. When something goes well in your life, you need to trace it back. Not just to last week, but to 6 months ago, a year ago. Further if you can. Find the small forgettable decision that started the chain in the first place. And that trace tells you what actually works in your specific life with more accuracy than any general principle could. You're building a map of your own cause and effect patterns. One that's more reliable than any other outside system, because it's built from your actual data, your own. What decisions consistently made over time have produced the best second order consequences for you specifically? And once you can see that clearly, you stop guessing about what to do. You replicate the inputs that produce the best outputs, and you become much more careful about the inputs that trace back to the worst ones. And you can also run the thinking forward. Before making a decision, ask yourself what the second order consequences are likely to be, not just the first one. And this effectively removes the natural delay from the equation, at least partially. You're borrowing your future perspective and applying it in the present. So you can make the decision your future self would actually thank you for, rather than the one that just satisfies the immediate preference. And it takes time to develop as a habit, like any real skill. But over time, it becomes more automatic, and the quality of your daily decisions will improve significantly from that single shift in how you're thinking about consequences. So with that said, let's cover the hidden mechanics of memory. So there's one more piece of this that ties everything together and that most people completely overlook. Memory, specifically the fact that your memory of what you've done doesn't just fade over time, it fades in a very specific, very predictable patterns that directly undermine your ability to trust your own process, take credit for your own results, and maintain the consistency that the entire compounding framework really depends on. Now, memory doesn't fade evenly, it decays in layers. And the layers that disappear fastest are often the most important ones for sustaining long-term motivation. The small daily inputs, the ones that are actually doing the compounding, are the first to go from your memory. You won't remember the specific session from 6 weeks ago. You won't remember the evening you chose the hard thing on a low-stakes Tuesday. You won't remember the decision that started a chain you're still benefiting from today. Those memories fade fast. What tends to stay in memory longer are the emotional peaks and valleys, the dramatic failures, the exciting wins that are usually very big and very noticeable, the high charge moments. And those moments, while real, aren't representative of what built your results. Your results were built by the quiet, unglamorous middle, which your memory will systematically discard. So over time, your memory of your own effort and consistency becomes systematically distorted, and that distortion is almost always in the negative direction. You end up with a self-image that underrepresents how consistent you've actually been and overrepresents how often you've fallen short. And that distorted self-image creates real behavioral consequences. If you believe you're inconsistent, you're much more likely to give yourself permission to be inconsistent. If you believe your effort doesn't stick, you're much less likely to trust a long, slow process with no immediate visible return. The belief becomes self-fulfilling not because you're fundamentally inconsistent, but because the belief gives your brain a script to follow, and the brain follows scripts with remarkable efficiency and no awareness that the script was built on faulty data. And so the source of the belief in many cases isn't your actual behavior. It's a corrupted memory of your actual behavior. You're running a self-narrative built on data your brain has already edited out. And this is why people who stop certain addictions because they're harming them tend to start them again. Their memory deletes the part of why they decided to stop the addiction in the first place, all the bad results that they got from that addiction, and starts putting on a rose-colored glasses on top of the addiction. And you start forgetting why you decided to stop in the first place. So one of the most practically important consequences of how memory works is that people routinely fail to give themselves accurate credit for the work they've actually done. So the weeks you showed up when nobody noticed, or the habits that you maintained in the dark with no feedback and no proof, or the hours you logged in the invisible phase before the results arrived, your brain has mostly filed those away under not important enough to retain, but they happened. They're the foundation of everything real that you've built. So when the results finally show up and they feel like they came from nowhere, that feeling isn't entirely irrational. From the inside, without the memory of the inputs, the outputs really do look like they appeared on their own. And when they do, people either attribute them to luck or to some vague sense of finally that doesn't connect back to anything specific. So learning to make that connection deliberately, tracing your wins back to their actual inputs, even when the trace is faint, is a genuine skill, and it closes the loop between your effort and your outcomes in a way your brain won't do automatically on its own. And without accurate credit for your past work, your motivation for future work becomes unstable, because you can't sustain effort for a process you don't believe in, and you can't believe in a process whose results you keep attributing to things outside of your control. And this creates a subtle but corrosive cycle where your genuine progress undermines your belief in your own agency, which makes consistency harder, which produces less progress. It's almost entirely driven by the mechanics of how memory handles the quiet and glamorous work that actually builds things. And the way you break it is simple in theory and requires a real discipline and practice. You document, you track, you create external records of your effort and your process that your brain just can't edit or discard, so that when the memory fades, the record remains and tells the true story. So there's another memory dynamic that's less discussed but equally important. As you build things over time, your progress normalizes, and what was once genuinely hard becomes your new baseline, which is excellent for performance and destructive for sustained motivation. You used to struggle to wake up early. Now you do it automatically. The discipline you built to make that happen was real and cost you something real. But it no longer feels hard. which means your brain no longer registers it as an achievement. And what your brain doesn't register as an achievement, it stops generating motivation to maintain. And this normalization means that a significant portion of your growth is always invisible to you in real time. The things you've already built feel ordinary. The things you haven't built yet feel distant. Your subjective sense of your own progress is systematically understated by the very success you've already achieved. So periodic reviews help with this. When you look back at where you were a year or two ago and actually compare it honestly to where you are now, you briefly unnormalize your progress and can see it clearly again. In other words, stop and smell the roses. That comparison is one of the more effective tools for sustaining long-term drive, precisely because it reveals what the daily experience actively hides from you. And the practical implication here is that gratitude for your own progress isn't just a feel-good practice. It's necessary. It's a functional one that counteracts normalization and keeps the evidence of your compounding visible and emotionally present, which is what sustains the effort that keeps the compounding going. Build a regular habit of looking back, not just forward. Spend genuine time reviewing what you've built as well as planning what to build next. That balance will keep you from outrunning your own sense of progress and helps you sustain the consistency that everything else in this training really depends on. And every time you connect where you are now to the specific work that got you here, you're anchoring your future effort in real evidence rather than hope. And evidence is a much more durable foundation for consistency than motivation alone will be. Memory is unreliable in all the ways we've just covered, which means you need external systems to compensate for what it gets wrong. Write things down, not just your goals or outcomes that you want and the things that you want in life, but your process. Log the days you showed up. Record the decisions you made. Note the small things you chose to do or not to do with as much as possible, with enough context that you'll be able to read it later and understand why it mattered at the time. You know, if you told me now that 10 years ago or so, at this point, I was cold calling 100 businesses a day from Google Maps, I wouldn't believe you. But I have the proof. I have my notebooks in which I put the numbers in their emails and scratch them off every single day. So this will create a body of evidence that exists outside your brain. One that can't be edited by the memory distortions we've talked about throughout this training. When you can look back at a log and see 47 consecutive days of showing up, of cold calling 100 businesses a day, your brain can't tell you that you're inconsistent. The record contradicts it with something much more reliable than feeling. And over time, a good log also reveals patterns that your in-the-moment experience would never surface on its own. What conditions produce your best decisions? What triggers lead to the choices you later regret? That pattern information is only visible in the aggregate, which means it only exists if you've been recording. So build a regular review practice alongside the documentation. Weekly is useful for catching drift early. Monthly is useful for assessing your trends. Quarterly is useful for the bigger picture and for re-anchoring your current effort and the progress you've already made. Each of these reviews should reconnect to your present to your past in a way that your raw memory won't do on its own. They prevent the amnesia we've been talking about throughout this whole section, and they keep the cause and effect chains visible and traceable rather than letting them dissolve into vague feeling over time. They also give you the information you need to actually improve your process over time rather than just repeat the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result. You can see what worked, where the compounding was strongest, and where you left the most potential on the table. That's the information that turns a decent process into one that compounds far faster. So with that said, let's cover the review. We talked about the overview, the truth about time, the trap of short-term thinking, the law of compounding choices, second-order consequences, the hidden mechanics of memory, the review, and your action items for the day or the next few days. First, start keeping a daily or a weekly log of your process rather than your outcome, so that you build an external record your memory can't edit or discard, noting the decisions you made, the habits you ran, and the moments you chose the harder thing when the easier thing was right there waiting. Next, deliberately push your evaluation horizon out further than it currently sits, moving from weekly to monthly, or monthly to quarterly, or quarterly to yearly, or yearly to every 5 years, and give your compounding the time it actually needs to become visible before you draw any conclusions about whether it's working. And when something goes right in your life, trace it back as far as you can to the small decision that actually started it. And when something feels off, do the same in that direction, building the habit of connecting your current reality to its actual causes rather than its nearest and most convenient circumstances. Basically, connect the dots. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, make sure to let me know. But I think that if you really watch this training and pay attention, and if you even rewatch it if you need to, it can absolutely change your life. It changed mine. So make sure to take this seriously. It will change your life if you actually apply it. With that said, if you want to work with me one-on-one to improve every aspect of your life, to become clear on what to do in every aspect of your life, health, wealth, love, and self, to gain clarity, then make sure to book a call from the link in the description. Again, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, let me know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.